Yeah, go ahead. We'll stop that thread.
How was vacation?
It was wonderful. To start it all off, we flew out and we were going to fly into Malta. Take a step back. My best friend from like the 7th grade. We went out there to help him celebrate and help him. We went out there to celebrate his 20th anniversary.
You need help celebrating your anniversary.
Right. He didn't need me.
We're here to bring joy.
People call me and like, hey man, can you come out? Because it's just going to be difficult celebrating 20 years of marriage without you.
Yes. You are that integral to our marriage, our marital bliss.
It's a service that I provide. So
I hope it's free.
So he wanted to go to Italy.
Did he want to do like the Caravaggio exile tour? I mean, going to Malta and being part of the Knights of St. John and just this is where you killed a man.
So they went to London first. So we were doing like a little bit of a prequel to the vacation, and then we were going to meet up in Italy afterwards. And so they were going to London because they had friends in London. So my wife and I decided, well, we've got a few days to do something. What can we do? And we were looking at other areas, and we'd been to Italy before. So we were trying to find areas in the area which we hadn't been. And so we decided on Malta, mainly because I really had just watched Altman's Popeye and was familiar with
the Maltese Falcon.
I was watching Popeye. And the Popeye sets that Altman built in Malta are still standing. There is a Popeye's village in Malta that still exists to this day. Now it is a theme park. Unfortunately, our flight got delayed going into Malta, going into Rome, and so we were unable to get into Malta. That did not happen. But had it have happened, I would have gone to Popeye's village.
Popeye's village and Caravaggio's time at the Knights of St. John.
Yes.
That sounds it's like an intellectual sort of vacation, right? And you can do course, sort of like the low middle brow. Not that Altman is low brow, but I don't know, Popeye might be, right? And then the high brow of Caravaggio.
Yeah. Popeye was... Have you seen Popeye?
It's been a long time.
Right. I mean, because it was a big deal when it came out.
I prefer the cartoon.
As most do. I mean, and to be fair, Altman did not get the budget that he needed to completely finish the film. So, like, as you get to the end of the movie, which is a 2-hour movie, there's no reason that Popeye movie should take 2 hours. You've got Henry Nilsson, who wrote the songs for it, who then was like raked over the coals for writing the songs for it. But I mean, honestly, weirdly enough, going back into Paul Thomas Anderson famously used them for Punch Drunk Love. So all the songs that Emily is singing, well, I guess, or when she's falling in love with Sandler's character, that's the song that Olive Oil is singing to Popeye, or Olive Oil is singing basically about her love life.
I've not made that connection.
And
that's why you're here.
That is, I have those.
That's what you bring to this actual table that we're sitting at.
Right. So I lost my train of thought, but yeah. So it's not a good movie. It's not a good movie at all. I will say it's an interesting film, being that it was close to the cusp of Robin Williams' height, or kind of the beginning of his height of his popularity. Well, obviously, he'd done Mork and Mindy, and he was done all the stand-up specials. And he really probably wasn't quite the movie star at that point. This was 1980, I think, that this was made. And so it was an interesting film that was being made. Everyone was like excited about it because, again, it just was kind of going to be a spectacle, right? And then it kind of flopped. It just was too long. It didn't know what it wanted to be. And it
was based on a cartoon. I mean,
yeah, it was based on a cartoon that was essentially one note. And no offense to the Popeye lovers out there. And then it muted everything Robin Williams brought to the table, right? It wasn't. Yeah. It wasn't an Aladdin role, right? It was just he putting on prosthetic forearms and
instead of painting himself blue to play a genie, right? Those are his real forearms. Come on. Okay, tell us what the name of the show is.
Did you? Okay, yes.
unless you want to keep talking about Malta.
No. I didn't go, so I didn't get to go to Malta. That was the whole point. We spent some time in Naples. We spent some time in Florence, and then we did some agro-tourism horseshit in this place called Salvadonica, which is outside of. We were basically in Tuscany the entire time, and except for basically one day in Rome. Right. But it was great. It was wonderful. It's annoying to be in Italy because of
the fascist elections that just took place.
That and it was weird because one, I don't speak Italian, so when turning on TV, it wasn't like it was in your face, or I wasn't picking up an Italian paper or what have you. And it really wasn't. I mean, it was. I don't know, like Italy in the big cities. It just seems like it's not that political of a place. And maybe we're just seeing the populace and from a tourist perspective, but you didn't get a lot of that.
Do you feel like America is that political of a place when you're just in a big city or in somewhere that's not, I guess, surrounded by like-minded?
I wouldn't have said so probably less than 12 years ago. No, but I mean, like now, you don't go around. You don't see. Even though Italy's elections went far right, I didn't see. Of course, maybe I did, and I just wasn't cognizant of it. Of
the populism here,
of flags and bumper stickers and things of that nature. I didn't see this sort of outward display of nationalism that we tend to have, especially here in the Dallas-Fort Worth metroplex.
When you said, I'm pretty sure that you said agritourism, but I heard agro-tourism. Like you were just super aggressive in your
That's how I like to do
tourism philosophy. It's like, get out of my way. I want that souvenir.
And to be fair, we just stayed in an expensive resort and did cooking classes.
This isn't pizza. I get Domino's. I know what pizza is.
I just sat there and was like, where are the fucking free breadsticks, man? Over it and over and over again. Breadsticks don't taste the same here.
Okay, let's talk about movies and not politics.
Let's talk about movies.
This is Why Does the Wilhelm Scream? So today we're going to dig deeper into The Master, which is 10 years old, which I think technically is 5th grade.
Debate setting.
Right. A little later, we'll play what I'm calling the association game. If you have a better title for
that's fine. Okay. Let's stick with it.
Good, because I wasn't going to change it anyway. Where we have brought in some other films that we think in some way engage in conversation with The Master and PTA. But first, let's talk about Jean-Luc Godard a little bit. The French auteur, artist, titan, died September 13th at 91. He died by assisted suicide.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I didn't read any deeper into that, but I saw just a quote. So my question to you is, what's your relationship experience with Godard? Because he's not. I would say he's not an easy filmmaker to often engage with.
Yeah, I will say, I have not watched. He's prolific, right? I mean, so I have not seen everything clearly that he's done, and most of the stuff that I have seen, I mean, is mostly his early French New Wave stuff. So the early part of his career where he was really breaking out.
Was Breathless the first one you saw? I'm just curious.
Either Breathless or A Band of Outsiders that I saw first. I'm pretty sure it was Breathless, and then it kind of led me in just because that's how normally people.
That seems the entry point right to him.
Yeah. And it's for me. I would being a film nerd, what have you, however you want to classify it,
lover.
Yes, but can you say it in a lower tone?
Not now. I'm laughing too much.
He is, aside from him just being French, and his films aren't necessarily the easiest to watch. I will say that what drew me to him is clearly his love of cinema and clearly his love of American cinema, in as much as that he was this, if you're not aware, he was part of this group of film critics who decided to make films on their own.
Him and Truffaut and Eric Romer.
Yeah. And so to that extent, like, and obviously you can't name a filmmaker of the modern era that has not been influenced by one of his filmmaking techniques. But that sense of coolness that he and love, clear love that he had for what America was producing at the time, and like these B movies and noir movies, and that just kind of informed his voice to that extent. And then just being this one of these things where like, okay, I can do that, and here's how I can expand on it. Here's how I can make it better. Here's how I can just take it to the next level. To me, that made it a little bit easier for me to get into his films. Was just because of that. I felt like I was him. Not necessarily a great filmmaker, but I felt like I understood where he was coming from. Also, just seeing Italy and France and just all of Europe in that mid '60s era is just so freaking cool. Yeah. Like, it's just the dress, the speak, the cars. Attitude. Yeah, and it's a cleaner Europe. Like, if you go to Europe now, it's there's a lot of graffiti. It's just kind of, it's devolved over 60 years.
Don't hate graffiti artists. Graffiti's cool.
If they're art, I'm cool.
I mean, look. We're not going to get in this conversation about what is and what isn't art. Right? I feel like I have this conversation way too much, right? Just like way too often. That's not art. I'm
fair
like,
enough.
Fuck off.
Fair
right?
enough. Okay, no. I will say that a name spray painted in less than 30 seconds, I would argue, probably isn't the highest form of graffiti art.
Not the highest form. There you go. Okay, all right. We can agree on that. We can agree on that.
But watching, watching Breathless as they're walking, down a French street with all of the European 60s cars, and there's just a beauty to that and a warmth to that if you're not watching these movies, and I know that, like I said, the barrier to entry is a little high. I mean, and so, yeah. But there is just a love of cinema that just exudes off of the screen, that just pops off the screen, that if you are a film lover and you haven't, obviously gone into his set of work, then I would highly recommend it. It's and you see that same sort of love, obviously, from the filmmakers today that were video store clerks, and I'm obviously speaking of Tarantino and Paul Thomas Anderson and Wes Anderson and all of these people that have similar styles and that grew up in, not necessarily so much as being critics, but also grew up kind of in that era of watching these films and then taking that love again and
being immersed in it. I mean, right. Being surrounded by being immersed in it. I first came to Godard. I was living in Columbus, Ohio, and we had no money and no cable television, and no streaming services were around. And so I would go to the public library and just like load up on DVDs. And it was a lot of, I had been into sort of foreign and art house films before, but they weren't as accessible. It's harder to find. And so I'd go and I'd like stack up on Bergman and Antonioni and Truffaut and Godard, and I would just like watch those, and eventually I understood them, I think. Right. But then I was in grad school when Two in the Wave came out, the documentary on Truffaut and Godard, and it was screening at the Contemporary Arts Center that was on campus. So I went and saw that, and a colleague asked me, or a classmate asked me, if I was a Truffaut or a Godard person. I hate binary oppositions. I hate either or questions.
Right.
I'm like, what? Why? The writer, the essayist Philip Lope, had a similar take on Bergman and Antonioni, right? He was like, well, I'm an Antonioni person. I'm like, well, cool, me too, but I don't know why we have to like have that conversation.
Right.
Nevertheless, my preference for Godard has always been in the way he challenges the viewer, in the way that he just will not stick to like a narrative structure and is always trying something new out, right? Back to this point of Breathless and all the film references, he was the kind of filmmaker who could overload the film with references so that his movie sort of disappeared into those, but then reappeared as something brand new, right? And so they never got in the way. You see a lot of films that make references, and you're like, it's a little too heavy-handed or on the nose, and his never were. I mean, because he had Jean-Paul Belmondo look at Bogey and say Bogey, right? I mean, and you're like, he's just calling attention to it, right? I went back and watched two specific films. Alphaville, have you seen that? Mm-hmm. So Alphaville, and to me, it was this movie about like imagination versus reality, right? Or reason and logic. But it was also this like complete mishmash of genre films. You've got film noir, you've got sci-fi, and you got Western, right? And so there he is making that commentary on use your imagination. I'm not going to deal with sort of like reason or logic in this city where acting illogical can get you killed, right? Right. I mean, it's such a cool. There's that scene where Anna Karenina is crying, and someone goes, "Are you crying?" And she goes, "No, because that's forbidden." And you're just, I mean, it's like this sly humor that you don't expect, right? But it's like Godard in this way reckons with the Enlightenment in a way that we still can't, and it's kind of like neoliberal capitalist society. We're back on politics, apparently, right? The other one I went back to watch was Goodbye to Language.
Which I haven't seen that one.
It's just pure poetics. I mean, that's it. It's just him studying sort of the use of language and rhetoric and images and text and 3D technology. And so it's just, I mean, it's an assault in a good way, right? To sort of your senses and to how he's using structure, language, and again, just images. His use of image, his use of text, the way he uses that to say something, I find kind of incredible. He knew all this. I mean, back to I think what you were saying too is he knew that cinema was a lie, right? This is just, I mean, this movie is not real,
right?
And it reminds me, I think he would have been the filmmaker that probably Susan Sontag liked most, in that he let the form speak for the ideas, right?
Yeah.
And then this kind of like medium is the message idea, where he just let that form take over, right? And it sort of did all the work, for him, right?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And it's interesting too, like you look at his black and white films and his color films and just, I don't know. There's such a, like I said, and I can't give it words, right? Because it's just there's the scene where in Contempt where Brigitte Bardot is in bed with her, she's just asking her lover if he likes my bottom and I likes my breast, and it's just this. And she was obviously a gorgeous human being, regardless. But that scene, the way that it's filmed, and it's so soft and so, I don't know, just the colors that it conveys are just so amazing, and that you just are in this scene between two people that is just it's incredible.
And that use of color is different than the use of color in Pierre Le Fou.
Oh, of course,
right?
Yeah.
Which goes back to what you're saying, that the use of colors in that scene conveys something that's more soft, but that film is heartbreaking.
Oh, absolutely.
So heartbreaking. I mean, a fairly autobiographical portrait of him and Karenina. And
I did like that all of his wives were named Anne or Anna. It makes it easy.
That's so weird.
It's a genius. It's a genius move.
He doesn't have to remember.
It's like Einstein wearing the same clothes every day.
And if he accidentally calls his lover by the wrong name, I mean, it's not going to there, is he?
Right.
You can't spell Godard without God. So. All right, you want to get into The Master?
Boy, do I.
All right. Let's do it.
Boy, do I. Did you go to the screening?
I did go to the screening.
Did anything come out in the conversation post discussion?
So,
we're talking about the Fort Worth Film Club screening that was this past month.
On September 21st. Yeah. So there's a fairly good attendance. I think that the conversation, I think, hovered around the idea of the relationship between Joaquin Phoenix's character, Freddie, and Philip Seymour Hoffman's character, right? So the like summary, right, is that a naval veteran. I wrote this down. Right? A naval veteran arrives home from war,
I didn't watch
unsettled.
It, so.
I've never seen this film. A naval veteran arrives home from war, unsettled and uncertain of his future, until he is tantalized by the cause and its charismatic leader, referring to Phoenix and Hoffman. A lot of it centered around this, I think, relationship between the two of them, the conversation that is, and how they functioned as father, son, mentor, mentee. You know, I think so many of PTA's films are about that relationship, or are about that those relationships, the father, son, the wayward male looking for guidance from like an older, more experienced man. I tend to push back on the latent homosexuality in the film. I mean, I can see it, but I don't find it to be an interesting talking point.
I don't really even think it's there.
Okay, good.
And to be fair,
I'm sort of hedging my bets there on what you would say, right?
No, I mean, I can see where you'd pull that out, but I think it leans into the father-son aspect more than it does homosexualness, because I think I don't think Paul Thomas Anderson would have shied away from that if that's what he wanted to convey.
Right. He made a movie about the porn industry. I don't think he's going to be afraid of going there. Right.
Right. And there's nothing that Phoenix portrays that is anywhere near homosexuality. In fact,
it's the opposite.
Right. All of his desires are for female adulation, for female companionship, for connection with women. He clearly is looking for structure in his life. He's clearly looking for, actually, I take that back. I don't think he's looking for structure. I think he's looking for a sense of self, right?
Right.
He doesn't, and he hasn't found it so far in the institutions in which he's placed himself in. So obviously the military did not give that back to him, and it actually degraded his overall mental state. And so when he stumbles upon the cause, he finds something that's interesting there that allows him to medicate in a different kind of way than he had been in the military.
Seemingly more productive way, right? But right. I think you you hit on something where the cause welcomes him, right? So it sort of, or at least part of it, right, opens its arms and brings him in, right? Now, whether that's in a cultish way or not, I don't think this guy cares.
Well, does it though? I mean, is it the cause that opens him in? And Chris, I guess this is the conversation that we can get into. But is it the cause that welcomes him in, or is it Philip Seymour Hoffman? Is it Dodd that welcomes him in?
Is there a difference?
Right, and because and I would say from my perspective of the film, there is, because I don't think the cause exists without Amy Adams' character. I think Peggy is a significant portion, and she's the. So if you want to put the, and again, I not to get, I guess we can get Freudian in it, but she clearly is the super ego.
I was going to say,
Dodd's the ego and Freddie is the id, right? Yeah. Freddie's just trying to find himself, doesn't understand, there's no morality. Peggy is all about the cause. Sure. And Philip Seymour Hoffman bounces back between the two of them in the sense that he's always drawn to this, concoction of a human being that seemingly can do whatever they want to do.
Right.
But he also wants to be able to pull that back in. And like I said, there is that father-son aspect, because clearly Dodd does not have the ability to convince his own son that what he's doing is worthwhile or even real or, something to be, Jesse Plemons sits on the outside of it and just basically is there to take in the benefits without actually having to be, actual part.
Do any of the work or be part of that. But I think that so this idea of the cause, or who is the cause, or does the cause welcome him in, or is it just Hoffman? I don't think you can have sort of that organization being the cause, right, without both Hoffman and Amy Adams, right? I mean, or that character, Peggy, because she is spurring him along, right? She is sort of that ambition, right?
Right.
I think without her sort of playing that role as the ambitious spouse pushing him on, Dodd or Hoffman is just going to be a ne'er-do-well, right? He's never going to quite
I think he'll
fulfill that kind of role.
Right. He'll just be a failed science fiction writer.
Right.
He'll be a guy with some great ideas or some good ideas, some ability to manipulate.
He'll have ideas.
Right. But he won't be able to drive them. He won't be able to get money out of them.
Right.
And he won't have he will always be drawn back to that. Yeah. Whatever thing he sees in Freddy.
And at first, Peggy Dodd does welcome him in, right? Sit with us, Freddy, she says. Right? But it's only later when she sees kind of how her husband is acting through Freddy that she starts to recoil and push back.
Yeah, that scene, not to jump too far ahead, and I don't, this is our first one of these, so how we want to actually deconstruct these movies is going to be a by the seat of our pants experiment. The scene
in a Derrida way
that interests me, and when I go back to it over and over again, I can't quite put my finger on how I interpret it. But the scene in the house, in Laura Dern's house, where Dodd is singing and dancing and then from 1 minute to the next, the women are clothed, and all the women are then completely nude, including Amy Adams' character, every woman in the scene.
And she's pregnant.
Right. That scene to me is one of the more interesting scenes in the movie in its interpretation of what actually is going on there. Is the cut how Dodd is experiencing it and versus how Freddy would like to experience it? Is it how Dodd would want to experience it if he were given the ability to act on all of his Freddy impulses and to use the cause to further along his animalistic nature, where he could, be with all of these women that are enamored with him? Is that what he would want to do? And then, because immediately after that, you see him and Peggy in the bathroom, and she's basically saying, "I want you to stop drinking. You can't hang out with him. You don't look at other women." And so clearly, she saw something in that moment, and obviously, the nudity was there to convey what Peggy saw, or what Peggy was feeling, what Dodd was doing, and how he was behaving in that scene. Maybe it was allowing us to take it to, basically be able to visually see what Peggy was.
Yeah, it's a really interesting scene, and I think that there are several scenes in the film that do this kind of thing, and where Freddy is our point of view character, right? I mean, really throughout the whole film, right? And so we see that scene from not just Freddy's point of view, but from his angle, from where he's sitting, right? And so, this kind of like upward angle, but also just barely above the ground, right? And when it cuts there, Dodd also makes that motion where he sort of grabs his nose and like pulls his ear, which is this signal to Freddy to go make me some more hooch, right? Right. Which is basically Prudo. He's making jailhouse wine, right?
Right. He's making poison, right?
Well, look, alcohol is a sort of neurotoxin in general, right? But we need to get into that. So I always viewed it sort of from Freddy's point of view, that this is sort of, we're seeing the embodiment of kind of how Freddy sees everything, which is not to be prudish, but from a level of kind of depravity, right? And from a first carnal lust, right?
We're introduced to Freddy by him pouring booze into a coconut, and then essentially
having sex with a sand mermaid,
right? And then or sand woman, sorry, and joking off into the ocean, kind of thing. So
but I also think this gets what you were saying. I think it also represents how Dodd would like to see things or like to experience things, which then connects to how Peggy sees the two of them together, because she sees Dodd make that like motion of like, make me some more hooch, Freddy, let's have some fun, right? And so that's then her coming to him and saying, I don't want to find out about anything else that you do, right, outside of us,
right?
And so I think it's all very kind of interconnected and really, obviously skillfully done by PTA, but in a way that does raise this question of how is this scene connected between the three of them, and then how does that dynamic change?
Yeah, it's just interesting because the scene is so seemingly out of place in the movie, and clearly it has intention, but it does seem like that's the first scene you really see where there are fantastical elements that are being shown here. The other one, in my experience, was the scene where once Freddie has proven himself to be uncontrollable and then comes back into the fold, and Amy Adams then steps up and is really more part of his adjustment or whatever they call it. I can't remember the exact terminology in the film.
They use processing in the film.
Which may be
in
exactly
Scientology, it's auditing.
Okay.
So it's a little different. It's the same. I mean, it's the same thing.
And so, but then she's the scene where he's looking at her and you're just seeing her face and she's saying, you know, what color are my eyes? And now make them green, or now make them black. And then her eyes turn to black. It's an interesting, and it's kind of brilliant on PTA's part that it's her that's doing that. That it's now the processing that Philip Seymour Hoffman does at the time is more with Rami Malek and River and Joaquin, speaking to one another and trying to get a rise out of one another. But that scene where she seemingly now like really putting the pins to him and like seeing if he's going to be a part of this thing and seeing how much they can control him, and the control really comes from her and not Dodd. And today that is an interesting, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I mean, she controls all of it. I mean, really, she reels that leash back in when she needs to, right? I mean, she has Dodd on a sort of choker chain and will sort of snap it when need be. And I mean, she really is in control. And I think that, I mean, how different is it from any kind of powerful relationship, whether it's like, like a Tammy Faye Baker or, first ladies in politics of women, usually in a very good way, right? Right. Controlling things, and clearly, Amy Adams' character has good intentions, but also wants to maintain the con and wants to maintain.
Yeah, she's never seen. I mean, clearly, the time that the movie is set, she's not going to be able to take the forefront of this movement.
Right.
She's not going to be able to be the face of it. She understands that, and she understands that she's part of a charismatic. She understands that she's part of a relationship, or she's in a relationship with a charismatic man, which would then lead one to believe that infidelity and that type of thing, especially in the 40s and 50s, was on the table for those types of people. That's why she comes to him and says, look, I don't want to know about what you do.
Well, and it was put up with. I mean, 40s, 50s, this is post-war America. Divorce is not a big thing, right? I don't think 50% of marriages end in divorce like it does now. Right. So there was more, whether those are unhappy marriages or whether that she's just, again, like tolerating, this thing because she doesn't know where else to go at that point. Right? He's bringing in the cash. People want to see him, not her. People want to talk to him, not her. People are inviting him, and by extension, then like to their big fancy houses and.
Right. And clearly he has to be the front, right? I mean, and to that extent, she allows that to happen. So going back to the idea of Paul Thomas Anderson's films and in the discussion, the balance between master and subservient, or master and mentee.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like mentor and mentee, right? I mean, and look, I mean, I know you're going to be screening Hard Eight or Sydney tonight, right?
Yes.
I watched it earlier, and you really see. I mean, that's what that movie is. I mean, so blatantly that Philip Baker Hall is taking John C. Reilly under his wing to teach him something, so he can sort of grow and become someone else. And you see that in Boogie Nights, you see that in Magnolia, you see that in not so much Punch Drunk Love, but you still see it in a way in There Will Be Blood. There's always you have men in positions of power and men who have lost their way in some kind of way, looking for acceptance and looking for help in all those films. But you also see this, I think by extension, family, right? I mean, I mean, this is not like a new revelation to anyone who's seen a Paul Thomas Anderson movie, right? But this idea of a family and dysfunctional family, and you have that here too. And there's always, I mean, Phoenix's character Freddie almost takes the place of Jesse Plemons as son, right?
Right, absolutely.
And for a minute does take place as favored son.
And I think that's part of what, in the movie, that's what draws Dodd to that. I think he clearly understands that Plemons is who Plemons is. He can't get rid of him, but he's clearly
one of the best actors of his generation.
Weirdly enough, yeah. And this was Plemons coming directly off of Friday Night Lights. So, and really, he has given nothing to do in this movie. I mean, like, he looks good. No. I think he's hired because he has a passing resemblance to Philip Seymour Hoffman. Yeah. And which is not to denigrate his acting ability. Like, I mean, he's great. He's good in the scene that he has. And that scene between him and Phoenix, where he's in Phoenix is just like, do something, do anything. You know, that's a great scene. But clearly, what Dodd. There's a lot of aspects to Freddy that Dodd is drawn to, and I do agree that had it all worked out, and Freddy would have come around to the cause and fully bought in. He could have been what Plemons was supposed to be to Dodd.
Yeah, you know what I also think is interesting about this film and about, I think, PTA's movies in general, is that these characters do not change very much. I mean, they change like this much. And again, this is an audio format. No one can see me like making this symbol for like very little. But they don't change. They are kind of who they are. And there's maybe minor adjustments. But I mean, Freddy at the end is still Freddy, right? I mean, Dodd and Peggy are still kind of who they were at the beginning. Freddy may have gained a little more independence or understanding, but not much.
I think what Freddy gains by the end of the film is a little bit better understanding of himself. Because you see him, and it's a little on the nose. The last woman that he's with at the bar, her name is Wen. So it's a little bit, it's a little bit twee at that point. I know we've used that term to talk about Paul Thomas Anderson's other movies, but that sense that he goes to England, brings Dodd the Cools, and is listening to the same bullshit story that he's heard across the entirety of the film. At that point, Freddy realizes that the cause is no different than the Navy, no different than anything else he's experienced, and now he can get past that window that he sees through, that he's beyond the side on the side of. So in the exercise where he's going from the wall to the window, from the wall to the window, from the wall to the window, he's butting up against the cause. He's violently reacting against it, just like he did in the military. And in this sense, he's past this. At least at the very least at the end of this movie, he's gone towards something. I think he's made the most growth out of all of this, clearly. He's had the biggest arc in this sense. So I think
where he's meant to. Right?
Well, of course. And I think so where he grows is a sense of self that he did not have before he met the cause. And it wasn't that the cause necessarily brought that out in him. It just showed him that maybe all of these constructs in society and everything else are bullshit, and that you have to find what makes you you. And if it's a matter of connecting with somebody on a, sexual or intimate or emotional, whatever basis, Freddy is still going to be true to Freddy. But he doesn't have to continually bash his head against the wall to try to fit into something that he does not understand.
Or engage in these kind of systems, right? Because at the end of the day, and no offense to anyone who may or may not be listening, right? But a structure, a system like the military is not so different from a system or a structure like organized religion, right? You're given a set of rules to follow, and you better not follow them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And Freddy has found out, I do not belong in these systems, in any kind of system like this, right? And so he's going to go out and he's just going to be in this broader system where he can be chaotic in that way, which is who he is.
And I think I think that, he sees that like I said, I think the idea of him being with the woman at the end is a sense that he can function in this world in whatever way that he needs to function, that he doesn't need some sort of guiding principle that is misaligned with how he wants to live his life. Going back to that, so Dodd's, how do you feel about the cause in general? I mean, do you think, so coming into this film when I first watched it, and this was when it came out, I think this had two things going against it. And I think this is why you see, or why you saw at the time, that maybe critical and public reaction to it was a little less than enthusiastic. And I think, obviously with any Paul Thomas Anderson film, there's going to be people that are dyed-in-the-wool fans that are going to love his movies. This one I think was, clearly 3 Oscar nominations. Paul Thomas Anderson's not nominated. Going back to my point, I think the fake breakdown of Joaquin Phoenix's persona in real life, and I'm not there, that whole Casey Affleck thing that happened, and the idea that this was going to be some sort of expose against Scientology, and this was going to be a real takedown of the tenets and of L. Ron Hubbard. And I just remember when this first came out and when it was talked about when it was being made that, Paul Thomas Anderson is making a movie about Scientology. This is not what this movie is about. No. It's only tangentially associated. And of course it uses a lot of like L. Ron Hubbard's son was much like Jesse Plemons.
Right.
He believed that L. Ron was making all of this up. Obviously, the sea, being on the sea, and all. So, yeah. But again, this was not even really a study on cult behavior. Really, it was more of a enigmatic leader. That, like I said, the story is about 2 men.
It's a PTA movie. It's got the same. I mean. So last time we were here, I talked about like Hemingway and that like one thing, right? We all have one thing that we can write about. We're lucky to have that one thing. I mean, this is kind of PTA's one thing. I mean, it really, whether you want to extend that further into family, in every movie that he's done, even Inherent Vice, there's a loose collective of people that all know each other. Right? I mean, and so you know how sort of media and people will talk and ways to sort of gin up excitement or conversation. And so like I remember seeing it and I don't remember that conversation around it too much. And I didn't go into it like looking for that, I guess. And some of like the influences, I guess he used some of the like unused scenes from There Will Be Blood. Right, but also like Jason Robards' Navy stories that he told him on Magnolia, the Pynchon novel V, and then some of L. Ron Hubbard stuff. Yeah.
Have you seen Let There Be Light, the John Huston documentary?
No, but I've seen clips from it.
Yeah, he takes a lot of the beginning is from Let There Be Light. So when when Joaquin Phoenix is out processing, when Freddie's out processing out of the military, a lot of that is from Let There Be Light. And Let There Be Light, it's available on YouTube in pretty good quality, actually. And it's a John Huston documentary. John Huston, Treasure of the Sierra Madre, great American cinema filmmaker. This is a documentary that he put together exploring the effects of PTSD on military men.
It was 1946, right?
Right. Yeah. And this was a thing that was put together in conjunction with the U.S. military, and the U.S. military, when it was done, was like, we're not going to release this. This is a terrible recruitment film. Like, and it is.
Come join the Navy, get PTSD.
Right. So there are things that are taken directly out of it. So the Rorschach test is in Let There Be Light. When you see the Rorschach test in Let There Be Light, the gentleman who's responding to the one that Freddie says it's an upside down penis. He says that there's 2 ladies. So I kind of got like, oh shit, are they actually going to do some sort of like sexual comedy? But that was all. It was just 2 ladies standing on a rock, which was the interpretation of the person that was looking at the Rorschach.
And what Freddie actually says rhymes with rock.
Right. So it's pretty much the same thing. There is also a scene. There's also a scene where one of the military men talk about nostalgia, and they basically, the Doris stuff is pulled directly from that.
Right.
And it's heartbreaking. In Let There Be Watch is a hard hour to watch, just because you're watching men who are clearly damaged by the traumas of war. These men are stuttering. Some of them can't talk. Some of them can't walk, and they're not and they're all mental issues. And so the film is really, it's meant to be this kind of like sweeping, come to the military hospital and we will perform hypnosis on you and we will care about you and we will make you better. So at the end of this 8-week stint in this military hospital, all these men are now playing, they're all coming back together and they're reconnecting with their families, and it's an interesting look at how mental health at least was how the Army was, or how the Navy was presenting that it was addressing mental health, because there are a lot of masculine things going on in this movie that you wouldn't have expected in 1946, like actual caring and actual talking about feelings and talking about how coming back, getting back into society and the the message that the military is giving in this movie is that they, and not to say that I disagree, that I don't believe it, but they were given that they're very open and caring and, you know, responsive to these problems that these men are having. But you're watching men who are, you know, essentially mumbling through a film. You know, they're not making eye contact with the camera. It obviously sweeps up in the last 10, 15 minutes, but it's not easy to watch at all. But yes, so he took a lot of that, how Freddie was being handled when he was in the military, coming out of it, as part of that story there.
This relates to the idea of the cause, at least in the premise that they mean well, or maybe mean well, or appear to mean well. Like, we're here to help you.
It's interesting from a perspective, you know, going into it and because about this time is when Scientology and the information about Scientology is getting out, right? And so people are starting to come into this knowledge of how dangerous, how aggressive, how life-destroying Scientology can be. So I think there's an appetite to bring this seemingly rich religion, when I say rich, I mean financially rich religion, down a peg or two, because it just seems like it's just so manipulative from the outside, and it's so like it's so to the point. Like, I mean, manipulative is still the right word there, where you bring people in on this the guise of self-help and self-realization and getting rid of all of these traumas that people have, and getting past them and being able to do it on your own. And to that extent, it's a powerful message. It's just once you get past the first layer of the onion and you start realizing that there's many, many layers, and they're very, very expensive and also,
make you cry. And
and to the extent where, you know, Scientology is looking for you to, and again, if there are Scientologists listening, which I'm sure there are not, feel free to email me and let me know if I'm wrong. But to this extent of these religions, and you saw this with the NXIVM cult and all of these cults, where they make you confess these, you know, confess these terrible things that you may or may have done, or these things that you hold as trauma that you would be embarrassed that they got out, under the guise of and the auspice of auditing you and helping you. But then it's being recorded, and it can be used against you.
And so it's blackmail if you don't.
If you don't play along, if you ever want to get out, you're definitely, you know, you have all these things that are now at the whim of some other nefarious organization.
When was the South Park episode where they just like ran around saying Elron like the entire time?
It's hard for me to. It's hard. So The Master came out in 2012. This would have like Tom Cruise's couch jumping thing. All of that would have come out well before all of this.
Right.
And so again, that's why I think there was an appetite to kind of bring all of this down a little bit.
And I think I bring that up because I don't remember going into this film thinking like, ooh, a Scientology expose. And I don't remember watching it and really thinking that much about Scientology. I mean, I know it's there. I know the beats are there, and I know the tenets are there. I know the character is there, but it just, I don't care. I guess I don't care about the Scientology aspect of it. I mean,
and to that extent, I almost wish that it had never been brought. Like Paul Thomas Anderson plays so many things so close to the vest anyway that it just seemed like it doesn't make sense to even mention it, in a sense where you could have just washed it off as a generic cult figure. It doesn't have to, like I said, it's like you don't mention it. He's not L. Ron Hubbard.
So this is the same problem I have with Nomadland. She doesn't need to mention Amazon. Anyway, that's a side tangent, but that's a real problem for me in that movie. Okay, anyway, but he doesn't need to be that explicit about it. He doesn't. It's a little winking. You see, I gave the script to Tom Cruise. He's cool with it.
And see, that's the thing too. I think there was a lot that was being discussed of, okay, well, you did a movie with Tom Cruise, and clearly he is, and you're evidently friends with him. You know, you went to the set of Eyes Wide Shut, and asked him to be in your movie.
That was him in the mask and the sort of in the corner in that one in the orgy scene. Okay,
he played the Lily Sobieski role. And so there was a lot being made of like, oh, what's your friendship going to be like? And I'm going to screen the film for you ahead of time. And again, what is the point there? You don't need that connection for people who have already made it. You don't even need to be that part of the discussion. Don't put that pin. I don't know. You paint yourself into somewhat of a corner, and when your film is released, you really don't take a dig. The only dig that's made at the cause at all is during the dinner scene, where the gentleman's asking about Luke.
Excuse me.
Right, which is a great scene.
It's a fantastic scene. We also get to see, this scene it's brilliant because we get to see that guy, in a very polite but aggressive way, bring up these problems and these questions about the cause, and then we get to see Philip Seymour Hoffman just lose it, right? And just call him pig fuck, right? And it's such a great moment to see that character and what happens when you push back against that character.
I want to go back to this scene again, but I want to ask a question. What would PTA be without Philip Seymour Hoffman? And again, I know he's directed performances out of other people that have been,
but he's been so standout in almost everything he's done with him. I mean, look, I rewatched Boogie Nights recently, and that Scotty J character is a nothing part.
Yeah.
But in Hoffman's hands, and I know that PTA wrote it for Hoffman after seeing him in Cinema Woman. Right? I mean, I know that was sort of like where the sort of inspiration for that came from. So
right.
But none of that's on the page in the script. None of that, that sweaty, trembling, creepy thing that he does there none of that's on the page.
That the way that Scotty J, that the scene where they all are buying those Italian shirts together, and Scotty J's shirt just doesn't fit him well,
and he can't button his pants,
and he's just kind of shrugging his shoulder, but so depressed, it's, man, that whole his character. I mean, obviously it doesn't make the film, but just adds such a great layer to it. Where if you take someone like Thomas Jane, whose character does nothing with that. And again,
he's got a great mustache. Come on.
Absolutely. But he does nothing with that. You could have put anybody in there. There's no reason Thomas Jane and again, Thomas Jane is not obviously he's not an A-list actor necessarily, but he's a name that you know.
I think he could beat you up though. So I don't know. I would
bring it on.
I mean, maybe not. Maybe not. I don't know.
It's fine. That's okay. I'm more than willing to spill blood.
He was in The Punisher, right? Wasn't he the Punisher?
He was not. Yeah, he was one of the Punishers.
Yes. Well, that's what I mean. But okay.
Dolph Lundgren was my Punisher.
Oh, okay.
This is like James Bond discussions. Who
John Bernthal's mine, right? Okay. No, I mean, I think that certain directors like PTA find these guys, right? And Philip Baker Hall. I mean, think about too what Philip Baker Hall has sort of brought, what they brought to each other. Mm-hmm. I think for a long time, maybe before the PTA stuff, we'd be like, "Who's that?" And now it's like, that's Philip Baker Hall.
Right.
But I think, some of these directors find these certain actors that they work so well with that they just transform in a way each other.
Yeah, I would. I'd like to know what Philip Seymour Hoffman's so good in Hard 8 as well. That whole scene is so brilliant, and that you juxtapose those two roles, right? Where he's the hotshot in Hard 8, and then he comes right back and plays Scotty J in Boogie Nights, and it's a completely different, just physicality. And it's the same guy. It's the same. He's kind of pudgy, but he just carries that with such a confidence in Hard 8, and such a lack of confidence in just.
But then look how he's in Punch Drunk Love too.
Right.
I mean, that's like another variation on that, in a different level of confidence.
Well, like Mission Impossible 3, where he's that and again going completely off the reservation as far as types of films we're watching. But there's a scene in Mission Impossible 3 where they're trying to get Philip Seymour Hoffman's character out of something. I can't remember exactly what it was, but they spill stuff on his shirt.
They're at this big party,
right? Yeah. And she's like, well, "Why don't you come down to my and I'll clean your shirt." And he's like, "Well, what would we be doing, while my shirt is off?" And it's such this Philip Seymour Hoffman. Yeah, he's a good-looking guy, but he's not your traditional sexy Hollywood man. But that role, when he says that, you're just like, "Ooh, man, that is he carries that." he carries himself with such, I don't know.
You really like pointing out how people don't have traditional attractive qualities.
That's every episode I'm going to find out about something.
Find someone to sort of make a comment. Well, he's not traditionally. And I can just go, you mean like doesn't have striking cheekbones?
It all just comes back to six-pack abs for me. That's all it is.
I have 8. I'm kidding.
That's why we're doing the podcast.
That's why, there you go.
But it must be nice to have that type of just kind of bullpen player that you can count on to pick up whatever role you like. Because again, you could have given him any role in Punch Drunk Love, and he would have killed all of them. And when I was watching The Master, I was like, I don't know why. And not to say that Daniel Day-Lewis wasn't great, but why didn't you put Philip Seymour Hoffman in the Daniel Day-Lewis role in There Will Be Blood?
So this is interesting, right? Because The Master comes right after There Will Be Blood. And you and I talked a bit after the screening recently of There Will Be Blood about how kind of hard of a film it is to watch. I mean, I think There Will Be Blood is a challenging film. Not that it's brilliant, right? But it's a little tougher to sit through. The Master, I find, is infinitely more watchable, even if I don't like it as much.
Right.
And so, like...
And I'm with you there.
But I don't know. I mean, I'm surprised that... See, I don't think Philip Seymour Hoffman fits in There Will Be Blood. He could have been the Paul Dano role, I guess.
I think you need someone to be... The Paul Dano role fits so perfectly with him because once you realize he's twins, then it becomes like I don't think you could have. Philip Seymour Hoffman is so unique looking. Paul Dano kind of could blend, right? You could walk past Paul Dano. I don't think you would turn your head necessarily, unless you were a huge Paul Dano fan. But once you realize that
Wildlife was a good movie.
Once you realize that they're twins, then it becomes a little bit more of a, because that whole thread kind of it's meant to throw you off, right? I disagree. I think that he would fit. I know his physicality would have been a little bit different than Danny, because Danny Day-Lewis plays that really kind of tall, lanky, and like he looks like he's hungered for oil his entire life, and that he's lived with a singular purpose.
Yeah.
But I think the passion that Hoffman brings to Dodd is very, very similar to the passion that Lewis brings to
absolutely.
Plainview.
Sure. Absolutely.
And I think they're clearly they're very similar characters to one another.
Yeah, I mean, they're variations on a theme there. I mean, as those characters go. Yeah, I think that Philip Seymour Hoffman. I almost said Philip Baker Hoffman. Philip Seymour Hoffman could have done anything that he wanted, played any role that he wanted to. I have a hard time, I think, seeing someone else in that role as opposed to Daniel Day-Lewis. But again, I mean, that's.
Right.
Reverse that and it would be the other way, right? So,
right. As you've seen. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it's like I couldn't see Daniel Day-Lewis playing Gunther in A Most Wanted Man, right?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, absolutely.
Right. No.
I mean, which was his last role, wasn't it?
Yeah, unfortunately. That is one of the ridiculous tragedies that we don't have that gentleman around anymore to give us his gift. I know it sounds self-serving, and obviously he was much more than just an actor to provide us. He was not a. Right.
But it would have been interesting to see how or what else he would have done at this point too, because. Let's see. When was he born? How old was he when he died? He was like 46 when he died.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So, and that was less than 10 years ago. So he'd be mid-50s. I mean, imagine like what else he would have done at this point, kind of growing into an even more mature, I think, actor. Because I mean, he hadn't done. What's he known for? Capote.
Probably
his roles in PTA movies. I mean, Happiness. Twister, yeah. Happiness. I can't get some of those scenes out of my head, and it bothers me. I mean, Lester Bangs. Fuck Lester Bangs, right? I think he would have had even more and more.
Well, and even take like the films that he was in that were garbage. Like Along Came Polly. He's right. He's the only reason to watch that movie.
Right.
He's great in it, and if you could have just cut the movie down to his scenes, it would have been a masterpiece.
It would have been great.
But alas, here we are. And the things that he led that were the smaller independent things like Love, Liza. He was so brilliant in owning Mahoney, which no one saw.
Right.
And just about a compulsive gambler. He's a bank. He works in a bank and he's writing all these loans to himself to cover his gambling debts, and he doesn't even really give a shit about gambling. He doesn't give a shit about winning. He just loves the rush of gambling. He's so good in that. So all of these movies that he made, kind of mid '90s, where he was just the lead, and go back to like his beginning roles when he was in When a Man Loves a Woman with Meg Ryan and Andy Garcia. He's amazing in that, and just a small little. He's in Meg Ryan's Alcoholics Anonymous class, or her group.
It's a support group,
right? Yeah, where you learn how to be an anonymous alcoholic,
which ironically. Not really anonymous.
I don't think we're not breaking any new ground to say that it's sad that he's no longer here and no longer making films. Back to The Master. Yeah. So, what's your overall take? I mean, how do you feel about it? Where does it fit within the Paul Thomas Anderson selection of films?
So I'm trying to. I think I enjoy it. Right. I find it really watchable. I find it infinitely watchable. In a way that, again, like There Will Be Blood isn't quite that watchable, even though I prefer There Will Be Blood. I think it's a better movie. The performances I think are great, right? And you touched on it. Three nominations, 3 Academy Award nominations for the actors, right? That's the thing I think that keeps me engaged. The story, the themes, again, are a variation on earlier themes. I think it's another one of these movies that it fits well with There Will Be Blood because of the performances, because of the score, because of the way it's shot, right? The way that it takes the water wake scene from Lady of Shanghai, right? The way that it uses certain aspects of Nightmare Alley, right, to kind of convey these ideas. I like it. I like it a lot. I don't like it more than Boogie Nights. I don't like it more than There Will Be Blood. I don't like it more than Punch Drunk Love. Right? I don't like it more than Magnolia. So I guess that's kind of where it sits, right? After those. But yeah, I mean, I think it's good. It's better than Fine. It's better than The Departed. Right? I think it's a great movie.
Yeah, it's weird to me that it is all of those things, and I find it somewhat lacking for me in a sense where I think all of the pieces are there. I think as a film as a whole, there's just something that doesn't quite resonate with me. And I think it's an interesting 1-2 punch. And maybe had it come before There Will Be Blood, and you saw it as a precursor to There Will Be Blood, rather than coming down off of what is clearly his masterpiece, right? And no one's masterpiece is going to be their most watchable movie. It's not going to be the film that you go back to over and over again.
Right.
And I could be pulling that out of my ass, and that could be some sort of film snob statement.
Well, that's your opinion, man.
Right. But I mean, There Will Be Blood is a 3-hour magnum opus that is. And again, I know it's not quite 3 hours, but it is. It's one of the. It's one of the best American films that's made in the past 2 decades. I mean,
I agree. I completely agree.
And you can say that it rests on Daniel Day-Lewis's shoulders, but you're getting good performances out of everybody in that movie. I think clearly The Master is a step down, and I think then as it's seen in his repertoire, you go directly into Inherent Vice, which is, I think, by all accounts, his worst film.
Sure.
And it was clearly the letdown. I think people were like. Looking back, you look back at that middle film between what was so great and what was clearly his least film, and I know that there's people who like that movie. I didn't go back and revisit it during the 2 weeks since we last recorded. That was the one that I couldn't bring myself to kind of get back into. I really despised it when I saw it in the theater. And to be honest, I haven't revisited it since then, so I don't know how I feel about it now. But I remember thinking, well, okay, The Master was kind of a step down from There Will Be Blood. Now we've gone down to Inherent Vice. Now can Paul Thomas Anderson pull himself out of this kind of quagmire of he was this great American voice, and now maybe he's kind of hit a lull. Yeah. But to that extent, I do like the movie. It's not, but I agree with you. I don't find it as engaging as his second, third, fourth, and fifth films. Right. I don't, and I could be mistaken where Punch Drunk Love clearly falls before this, right? So it's Boogie Nights, it's Punch Drunk Love. No, Boogie Nights, Magnolia, Punch Drunk Love, and then There Will Be Blood, right? So I think those, those are clearly his sweet spot of where he's really making movies those are the movies that he intended to make when he started out. Those are the movies he had in his back pocket when he started to become a filmmaker. It's clearly technically more proficient than even some of those films that we've mentioned that are more enjoyable. I don't believe I saw this. I know I didn't see this in 70 millimeter when it came out. Yeah. I don't know exactly where it screened for that. I would have liked to have seen it. I would have loved to have seen it on a big screen like that. I think that would have enhanced the experience quite a bit. But I think ultimately, just some of the things that the story is more difficult to get through, and I think the story asks a lot of the viewer to kind of understand where Freddy is. It doesn't give you a lot. It doesn't need to be handheld, but it doesn't quite put you to where there's a satisfying conclusion to any of this.
Right. And I don't think there has to be, but I think, at least to me, it sounds like maybe you're asking for a little more three-dimensionality of the character of Freddy, maybe a little more heft in the story.
Yeah, I think so. I think I think a little bit more of a duality. I think because here's the thing, where I think I kind of coming into this is that I think the Dodd character is so, and Philip Seymour Hoffman is so magnetic, and he's so engaging, and that's the story when I'm watching this movie I'm drawn to. Yeah. And I think that's kind of intentional. And obviously we're drawn to where Freddy is drawn, but we're beginning in the end, we're back with Freddy, and we're obviously clearly always kept at a distance kind of from Freddy. We're not meant to really want to be him or to accept his his failings as a human being. Meant to see that as as his growth. I don't know. It's to me like I think the interesting story is kind of somewhat left on the table, and I understand why you can't make that movie. You can't tell both stories. You got to tell one or the other. Right. But unfortunately, with Philip Seymour Hoffman in that role and being presented on the posters, and you are drawn to that character.
I mean, he kind of steals the movie. Right. I mean, his performance takes over and steals that movie. I mean, not in a bad way, but like you said, we're meant to sort of want to sympathize with Freddy, right? Freddy is us in a way, the viewer, right? We're supposed to be sort of next to him walking through it, and we're like, no, we want to go over here. I want to go hang out with this guy, right?
Yeah. And going back to that scene that we talked about before, where the cause is being called out, Freddy in that scene, up until this point, Freddy is being completely manipulated by the cause. Yeah. He's and not even manipulated. He's just openly, willingly go along with whatever is there. Right. He sits at the dinner when Amy Adams brings him to the breakfast table, and he sits at the dinner and listens at the wedding. And he listens to how Philip Seymour Hoffman is essentially talking about how he captured and wrangled Freddy. Right. And he's talking about, I grabbed the dragon and I wrapped it up, and now I'm watching it be the dragon. And Freddy doesn't understand this story at all. He doesn't understand that it's about him, and he's clapping along. He is childish in all of his actions when he throws the tomato or apple at the naysayer who's asking about leukemia. And so it's, like I said, it's an interesting. And it's a challenging film. That's a challenging way to present a movie where you've got to find yourself you've got to find your growth as a viewer while you're watching. You're trying to figure out what this guy you don't really like, and you're trying and you're being drawn in. Right. You're trying. Yeah. Obviously, he's presenting behavioral traits that we wouldn't want to obviously emulate.
Do you want to touch on Phoenix's performance at all, or do you want to move into something else?
No, I'm fine with that.
Okay. This was Phoenix's first role after the I'm Still Here, right? Wasn't that what it's called?
Yeah, I'm Still Here. Or because I'm Not Here
it was the Dylan. Todd Haynes Dylan film, right? But look at this run to me was really interesting to look at. So Phoenix goes from 2005, Walk the Line, 2007, We Own the Night, again in 2007, Reservation Road, 2008, Two Lovers, right? So 2 James Gray movies in there. And then he does 2010, I'm Still Here, 2012, The Master, 2013, The Immigrant, another James Gray movie, right? I mean, I find this a really kind of wild, interesting sort of Phoenix span. I mean, I'm not a big fan of Walk the Line, but I'm just not a big fan of biopics in general.
You can't, after you've seen Walk Hard, the Dewey Cox story, you can't watch those again. Have you not seen that?
No.
Oh, you have to watch it.
No, I have, and this is, I'm going to try not to come off like a giant film snob and like a giant dickhead, right? But I sometimes just don't go in for those comedies. What was I love John C. Reilly. I think he's so funny, but I think he's even funnier in a role like Reed from Boogie Nights, where
where he's just the
character's not trying to be funny, right? I know Riley's trying to be funny, but he's not, and it like plays so well. But what was the NASCAR movie he was in?
Ricky Bobby.
Okay, the Ricky Bobby thing, Step Brothers, stuff like that. I tend to sort of shy away from those, and I'm someone who will quote the entire movie Airplane to you. Right, so it's I don't know what it is, but I just kind of like don't. But yes, right. I mean, you can't. But even I can't think of Walk the Line and then think of John C. Reilly in that pose, like the shirtless pose for that movie. So yes, there is that connection. But I'm more interested in like Phoenix in these like James Gray type movies, right? That are a little more. Yeah, they're a little more artsy, a little more serious, a little more, pared down, too.
And none of them really ever work.
Right. This is true.
But that's James Gray.
But yeah. That being said, I'm still a James Gray fan.
Sure. Right? I like the attempt. I mean...
Look, sometimes that's all you need, and I'm on board.
No, right? Absolutely.
He fucking tried.
I'll watch a guy strike out over a guy walking all day long. Absolutely. Okay. And to the extent of, like, I watch all kinds of shit cinema in the sense that someone had an idea and they put it to film. That to me is half the battle, right? Yeah. As far as his period, he is such a strange actor. Like, as far as like his career goes and how this guy is actually a movie star, it just in the sense of like he was, he did Gladiator and then did Walk the Line and won the Oscar. It's interesting to me the reinvention and the fake breakdown story. Yeah, because I know that they were young. I know Casey Affleck was young. When has that ever worked for anyone? Right. When has that ever worked for a celebrity? When you tried to pull a Chris Gaines or like David Bowie? Yeah. Right. I mean,
okay. But here's what I would say about that. It's. And I'm jumping ahead of myself because I was going to bring this up later, but it's basically performance art. Right. And performance art is really, at least in my sort of viewing opinion and my relationship with like performance art, it's something that's very much kind of its time, right? And a lot of times it doesn't work. Right. Sometimes it does, but again, it typically only works within a certain kind of context. I loved I'm Still Here when it came out. I don't think it holds up, right? But I think like a lot of performance art, right? It has to be in that context, right? And I don't think that. Here's what I would say. I think that I'm Still Here works because it's asking these questions about celebrity, about what am I doing, right? About being a trained monkey, right? About trying something new, trying something different, right? Even though he's like, he's along for the ride, right? But the commitment that he sort of like puts into this, right? I think is great. But again, like it doesn't work going back on like reviewing. I also think it questions this idea of truth, right? In this. No one can see me rolling my eyes, right? But in this kind of like postmodern sense of like what is truth, right? How do we sort of manipulate and shape truth? So I think, look, I used this film. I was teaching a creative nonfiction workshop at Ohio State, and I used this film in conjunction with the Banksy film Exit Through the Gift Shop as a way to examine these ideas of like, okay, what is truth? Who says so, right? And look, I know there's an objective truth. That's not what I'm saying, right? Facts exist. I believe this, right? But also, like, we construct truths to make sense of our reality, right? this is not philosophy class right now.
No, I'm with you.
No, I know. I'm just like, I don't mean to be like...
My eyes are closed and I'm snoring, but I'm with you. 100%.
Like most of the classes I teach, right? No, this idea of sort of what is truth, how do we use this idea of truth to sort of shape our reality and our perception of things, which again, I think is how truth is used now, right? Truth is just, well, that's just my truth. I mean, people say this shit. Well, that's my truth. I'm going to speak my truth. Again, I think that on one level, it's nonsense, but on another level, it's actually important to understand that. And I think that that's what I'm Still Here was, in a way, trying to do, trying to get at, trying to attempt. Right? Again, like it doesn't work. But at the time, I was like, oh, I totally see what's going. Okay. Right?
Yeah, I'm with you. I just wish that the commitment level had been a little stronger.
Yeah. Sure.
It was turned over too quick. And it was too much like, okay, well, they're doing this for a film, right? This is not an Andy Kaufman. I'm going to never tell you I'm Tony Clifton. I'm never going to give it. And I'm never going to say. I would have preferred them to do something. And again, that obviously speaks to Kaufman's brilliance and his just desire and ability to take abuse.
And there's only one. And no, I mean, there's there's only one Kaufman, and that's just.
But to that performance art perspective, I think it needs to happen on a smaller scale. I think it would have been, and I don't know how you do it. And like I said, I appreciate the effort. Right. When it first came out too, I did appreciate the effort.
Yeah.
But I think that it turned too quickly into. I don't think that they let their discomfort get to the point where it should have been. Like if you're gonna try to make me convinced that Joaquin Phoenix is gonna try to be a real rapper and like lose himself and he's lost himself into this celebrity, because again, the real life aspect of it all then becomes. Because there were people that were really going through that, and of course, I mean, not to put too much of a pop culture spin on any of this, but like, if you look at some of the things that like Britney Spears was going through at the same time, which was a legitimate mental breakdown, and that we all, as a collective society, took joy in, and made fun of, and. I agree with you. I get what they were trying to do, but I think it's too easy to then step in and step out of it for purposes that are what's the end goal? What are you trying to do? Because again, if you're trying to tell me that I'm stupid and I'm trying to do something that I should be doing something different and that might look, I'm totally on board. I'll buy into that, but you better commit to the act, right? You better commit to telling. I mean, because again, going back to your enclave and being happy and rich and whatever, and then putting this aside and taking it off as like you do a coat, doesn't work for me.
No, I 100% agree, right? And that's the thing. Like, you look at it now, and it doesn't hold up. We have these kind of questions like, what the fuck are you? What do you think you're doing, right? Why do you think this is okay? Like you said, because people are actually going through this stuff. But at the time, we didn't have all of the capabilities to see some of those other things. Like we took joy in the Britney Spears downfall because of the paparazzi, because of how those images were delivered to us. They're delivered to us in a different way now, right? So we would never have that kind of collective. I mean, we don't have that kind of collective joy now, right? I mean, the internet got Britney out of conservatorship, right? I mean, so, but I mean, yeah, I agree. And that's why it's such a piece of its time. And yeah, they didn't take it to the level of discomfort because they didn't have to. Right, and I think that's where it really sort of falls down. And
right, but it's like,
we're joking. Okay, let's go back and do movies again.
It's exactly. It's Jordan. It's Jordan playing baseball. It's Garth Brooks doing Chris Gaines. Like you can't get me invested in something when you can just fall back onto the thing that you're really, really good at.
Right.
Look, man, I would love nothing more if Garth Brooks was still making shitty Chris Gaines albums to this day. Like Chris Gaines had started a Nickelback or a Creed frontband. Like it was just being totally into it. How brilliant would that be? We would be talking about that shit today.
Yes. As what we are.
Well, right. But I mean, legitimately living in an alternate universe where Garth Brooks had split personalities and he was Chris Gaines and Garth Brooks at the same time, and really. Like just unapologetically saying this, I'm gonna fucking do this. you would study it. Yeah. You would study this as a thing that exists, and it's just a brilliant piece of commitment.
And it's you going back to that Bowie point, right? Because that's what Bowie did, right?
Right.
Okay, now I'm the thin white Duke, right? Now we're gonna do Aladdin Sane. Now I'm androgynous. Now I'm this, right? And I don't mean that in a like kind of joking. I mean because he did commit to all that, right? And he's one of the few that could make that happen. And like we are studying that. I mean now, right?
Right.
I mean, so to that extent, but yes, and Andy Kaufman again. I mean, how uncomfortable did that guy make people, and how much discomfort did he put himself through just for the sake of a bit?
Yeah.
I mean, brilliant. Yeah, and so this is why, right? I mean, the Phoenix doesn't work. It doesn't hold up.
I think and maybe this is a bad analogy, but I think the only ones who came close to doing it really, really well were Sacha Baron Cohen and maybe Nathan Fielder.
Sure. Yeah.
Those guys are committing to the act, like where they're just. I mean, and again, I know Sacha Baron Cohen can step out of the roles that he's creating.
Right. Right. But when he's doing it. He's not.
Right.
Yeah. And I think. Last part on like I'm Still Here. I think you see the steam sort of run out of that film. I think you understand. Like by the end, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, you're just sort of playing a game because you can. Right?
And I think it works better. Honestly, had it been Casey Affleck.
Yeah,
I get the idea that it's a bigger star coming off of a huge Oscar win,
right.
But at that point, it almost becomes more disconcerting that this person really is in distress, right? And I think. To that extent, like you always thought Andy Kaufman was in distress. Like you never put a finger on Andy Kaufman.
Because he probably was. I mean,
yeah, absolutely. He probably. I mean, and to that extent, like Phoenix was in Gladiator. Phoenix was in Walk the Line. Like if you want to destroy your career, then destroy your career and then do it, and then rebuild it back up.
Right.
Otherwise,
you're just playing a game.
Right.
Yeah.
And we're all here to be part of and all we're here is to do is to further your career, and then to clap you on the back and tell you how brilliant you are. That's I don't know. Yeah.
Speaking of games, let's play the rest of the association game. So, we understand the game? That was one of my films, right? These are films that we think again are somehow in conversation with the master at PTA. And I think the I'm Still Here thing with the connection to Phoenix and this first film back, sort of. I watched the master, and I think anytime I see River Phoenix or Joaquin Phoenix, I think of that movie, right? So, I mean, that's kind of my connection, right? This is the line from High Fidelity, right? I can tell you how I got from Deep Purple to Howling Wolf in just 25 moves. That's this game, right? So give me one of the films that you thought of.
So one of the films I came back to, one of the films that Paul Thomas Anderson talks about being one of his favorite films. I don't know if it's his favorite film. I think clearly his Altman love is there. And I would argue that, going back to Punch Drunk Love is probably his. I still think people call that a Superman story. I think it's more of a Popeye story than it is actually a Superman story. Yeah. That can be debated, and we can talk about that on a conversation show. The one that I went back to was Putney Swope. So I don't know if you've ever seen Putney Swope, but I watched it again just in the past couple of weeks. Just kind of, and it clearly doesn't inform his style at all. And for those who aren't aware, Putney Swope was a 1969 film written and directed by Robert Downey Jr.'s father. He was a avant-garde experimental filmmaker. Yeah. So the movie is about this advertising agency who their CEO, chairman of the board, dies. And they have to go to a vote for the board to see who the next chairman's going to be. And they all vote for the person they think can't possibly win, and that person is Putney Swope, their only black member, who's their musical director. The movie is very much a precursor to films like Kentucky Fried Movie and Airplane. It really informs that type of sketch type comedy in those types of films, because it's the thread is what would happen if a black man took over a white advertising agency and then replaced all of the white employees with black employees for the most part.
Right.
And then it's just a series of vignettes and different character pieces, and then of course interspersed with funny commercials that they come up with. The first time I was ever introduced to this film, which was kind of embarrassing, but was in the movie Johnny Be Good, which I'm sure you've never seen.
I have seen Johnny Be Good.
Yeah, it's a terrible movie. But I've seen it. I will.
Anthony Michael Hall
in the
Robert Downey Jr.
Anthony Michael Hall coming out of like his John Hughes phase and kind of and pre Edward Scissorhands, so he was still a teen, but not quite as bulky as he got.
He's still he's the quarterback. He's the star athlete. Yeah,
he's the star quarterback of this whatever high school, right. And so the opening sequence of that, where he's playing his state championship game, and my dick's broke, rub some dirt on it, just all of that. God told me, I talked to God today. Jesus wants me not to go out there by like a bunch of F words and pussies and like just go out there and put a foot on their necks. Like, all of that is there's a legitimate like decent 15 minutes to that film and it's the first role for Uma Thurman.
Oh right, that's right. Yeah.
And so there's and what's weird about that movie is that there's a PG-13 version of that film, and then there's a R-rated version of that film. So I don't know, and of course that was one of the first, like, for me, director's cuts where there was just more nudity thrown into a movie to make it R-rated. But when they're at the drive-in, Anthony Michael Hall meets up with his girlfriend Uma Thurman, who he can't meet at her house because her dad hates him. They're showing one of the commercials from Putney Swope on the drive-in, and it's this really bizarre, like, non sequitur, and it's this this black guy and this white woman, and they're skipping through the fields, and it's like, and he's singing about how he saw her beaver flash, and that's all you see, like. And then she starts singing about how she gave him a dry hump, and so all of the commercials are like that. And this is a commercial for Zit Cream, essentially. The commercials are pretty brilliant. The movie itself is kind of a hard watch, just in the sense of you've got to know what obviously a lot of the satire that was going on in the in the 60s was of the time, and you kind of have to get an idea of and clearly this is not that hard to understand. I mean, there was a lot. The whole concept of the movie is how white culture is embracing black culture and utilizing, because once Putney Swope takes over the advertising agency, all of these firms line up, and basically Putney Swope is able to say, I'm not going to listen to you guys. You're going to do exactly what I say. You're going to pay me up front, and I'm going to do whatever I want. And then it just kind of obviously blows up on him, at the end, over time. It is so. Paul Thomas Anderson there's a couple of things that he takes from Putney Swope. Obviously, in Boogie Nights, Don Cheadle's name is Swope, and then in the Sister Christian scene, the Chinese person who is lighting firecrackers, that's actually in Putney Swope. So if you're watching Putney Swope and you see that, you clearly know the connection. It doesn't really speak to too much about his filmmaking perspective, but it does. I find it interesting, his love of those films and love of those filmmakers. Of course, Paul Thomas Anderson's dad was like a character actor and a commercial actor, and he was a
voiceover guy, or he was like the voice of like the local CBS or something, right?
Right.
So,
yes.
Yeah.
So that was my one thing that I kind of wanted to revisit was Putney Swope, and like I said, I would highly recommend going out and seeing it. I mean, I'm trying to find it. I think it's on Criterion.
Yeah, it has been.
And there's a Criterion release of it. If you don't, if you want to find it at your,
if you want to buy physical media,
or however you rent things these days.
Right. You should know you have all the streaming services. The second film, or another film that I thought of or sort of saw as being in conversation, was Paul Schrader's First Reformed. From 2017 with Ethan Hawke and Amanda Seyfried, where Hawke, is kind of the stand-in for Schrader, right? He plays Ernest Toller, a Calvinist pastor who's kind of like just completely like lost his way. You've seen this film, right? Yeah. He's lost his way. He's an alcoholic, right? He's mourning the death of his son in the Iraq War. He thinks the church has lost his way. this character and I think Schrader's kind of, man alone in their room, with their thoughts, kind of archetype, it plays in with PTA's kind of wayward males, I think, right? I see a lot of the Schrader's darker, I think, than PTA, right? Than PTA's characters. But I mean, look, Freddie and Ernst Toller are both going through like these existential crises, right? A constant existential crisis. Well, and look, if you're not going through an existential crisis in 2022, are you even trying? But I mean, that's why I see those connections between those male lead characters. Schrader doesn't always work for me. I don't believe that Willem Dafoe's drug dealer character in Light Sleeper spends that much time journaling for therapeutic reasons. Nor do I believe Travis Bickle spends that much time journaling, right? Do I believe that Ernst Toller in First Reformed spends time journaling like that? Yeah, I do. And I think that's when that kind of framing device works. But it's really how these kind of male characters and that search for self, right, for understanding of the world around them. That's how I see those two coming in conversation a lot. Right? Also, I think Schrader and PTA know more about film than the rest of the world ever will.
Oh, for sure. I'm
in terms of making references.
I would love to do a conversation show about Schrader's films.
Okay.
And again, we don't have to do it tomorrow, but put a pin in it.
Tomorrow I'm taking a nap. But yes.
Because I can talk for days just about his Exorcist prequel and how that all was right. Him and Rennie Harlan went back to back with that movie. I do like Schrader. When Schrader is good, he is really fucking good.
And I totally agree.
He certainly can miss the mark a lot of the time, but I do believe that he's put to film and written some of the best films in my lifetime, hands down.
Yeah. I agree, and I think again, like when he's good, I think he's really good. I like that his characters have this seedy side to them. Almost like all of them have this kind of seedy dark side. Even the character in First Reformed. That I think,
there's a dirty 70s aesthetic to all of it.
To all of it. Which speaks to where kind of he came from, or when he kind of came of age as a filmmaker, and his own sort of Calvinist dealings, right? Because Toller's kind of a stand-in for him anyway, right?
Right.
That I don't think PTA can capture that in the same way. So even though Freddie is kind of a depraved sort of degenerate, he's still kind of lovable. Like a mischievous puppy almost.
He's a boy, right?
Yeah, he's a boy.
I mean, aside from, because look, he's clearly vile, right? In the sense, like he's like the things that he does sexually are disgusting. But from a perspective of, but again, it's all acting out. And again, he's never, at least we don't see that he's ever sexually violent. I mean, and clearly he doesn't do any of that. He does everything in a schoolyard manner, right? Because the things, the times that we see him having sex, which is at the beginning of the film and at the end, he's more kind of Tune in Tokyo at the beginning, right? It's very fumbling. He doesn't really know what to do with the beautiful girl at the end. Right. And at the beginning. And at the end of the movie, he's just kind of enamored with the experience, and she's, on top of him, and he's kind of taking it all in, and this is like the best experience for him. All the rest of it is just what an adolescent, a preteen, a prepubescent.
What a prepubescent kid would say, or would think sex is.
And that scene where he's masturbating into the ocean, it's just this ridiculous scene where you see half of his butt crack and, he's like all hunched over.
Yeah,
it's comical.
It's ridiculous. Yeah. Okay. Give me another one.
So let me ask the question, because again, as I'm watching a lot of this, clearly this is the scene where Dodd is riding the motorcycle. Is very reminiscent of Slim Pickens riding the nuclear bomb down to Earth. This film felt very Kubrickian to me, and I couldn't put a finger on it if it was just, all of the aesthetic. I think it has a lot of the 2001 trappings. it has, I can't really say too much of does it really fit in with Clockwork Orange? I don't really think so. Maybe a lot of the framing per se, but I think the Strangelove aspect of it and the 2001 aspect of just the way that everything was positioned, everything that was framed, everything was set so perfectly, how everything was shot. Like, so the cinematography in this is just amazing. Yeah. And it's so easy to be overwhelmed by what's being presented to you. Like I said, it would have just... This film should never be shown outside of 70 millimeter theaters, right? You should only have to be able to go in and watch it in that format.
A nonstop traveling roadshow.
Right. The idea that this would ever be on a small screen in the back of an airplane seat is just baffling to me, right? Like, how do you appreciate
I don't know.
that?
I watch it on my phone.
Oh, sure.
I didn't.
Right.
I didn't. I'm kidding.
So nothing specific I would, but that whole scene, and then maybe, I was reading a little bit about, some comparisons people were making, especially at the time, and they were making a lot of the Brown Bunny adjustments to, basically because of the motorcycle scenes as well, which I don't really, I can't imagine Paul Thomas Anderson really finding much inspiration from Vincent Gallo or vice versa. Yeah. And that being said, I actually liked Brown Bunny, the director's cut of it being broken down. I actually like Buffalo 66. I think he's an abhorrent person in real life.
But this was before I knew a lot of that.
Sure. Yeah. And so and again, there's lots of reasons to not like Brown Bunny from a Chloe Sevigny perspective and the way that a lot of that marketing happened. But from a perspective of a film, I think he's an interesting filmmaker. It's unfortunate that he is the human being that
he is who he is. Right?
But I agree. I don't think that there was, and again, I know I brought it up, but I don't think that there was a lot of connection there aside from someone driving a motorcycle on a deserted road.
Okay.
But I do like the idea. I do like, again, going back to the Kubrick piece, that whole scene where Dodd is wahooing his way across the desert landscape. That seems so beautiful too, where they're both driving. I mean, obviously, again, you can look at symbolism, and if it hits you too hard, it can play against you. But that whole scene where Dodd is driving one way, and then Freddie's driving the other way, and he doesn't come back, and it's just it's
so good. It's he, in a way. Have you seen the film Melvin and Howard?
Yes.
Yeah, because that's from that too.
Right.
And that, again, with Jason Robards, and so you got the connection there. All right, my last film is a twofer.
Okay.
Right? Because I couldn't, so it's Glengarry Glen Ross.
Okay.
And along with that,
one of my favorite
House
films
of Games.
Right. So you're talking my language.
But here's the thing, and we talked a little bit about this last time. I know that PTA is often more connected or spoken of in relation with like Scorsese and Altman, right? And especially if you look at Boogie Nights, he's like, look what I can do. I can do all this shit. Right. But I think a lot of times, and especially in Hard Eight, the dialogue has some of these Mamet beats, right? And it's sort of like near iambic pentameter, but very kind of deliberate in the way that dialogue's spoken. There's that, but there's also every PTA movie, somebody's selling something, right? There's always this aspect of, I'm selling you this, I'm selling you that, or I'm running a con, right? We have to sell porn, we have to sell sex, right? We have to sell religion, we have to sell toilet novelties, right? And punch that crowd. But and even Magnolia, right? You have that Tom Cruise playing that kind of like Jordan Peterson, sort of like, a huckster. But there's always that element of sort of hucksterism of running a con, which is so prevalent in Mamet films, right? From House of Games to especially Glengarry Glen Ross, where it's like the whole point of that film is always be closing, always be selling. So those I couldn't help but like watch PTA and think about those things in conjunction.
It's interesting, and again, maybe I just haven't come across it, but it's interesting to me that it hasn't come up, the connection hasn't come up more between those two.
Yeah.
Because the scene in Hard Eight, when John C. Reilly and Gwyneth Paltrow have gone, and they're going to Niagara Falls.
Right.
And Samuel Jackson breaks the window of Philip Baker Hall's car and is expecting that, that whole dialogue scene it seems directly out of a Mamet play, right?
Yes.
It just seems, it seems like that whole interaction. and to almost to the detriment of that film, to be quite honest, because that is clearly, again, going back to what we talked about last time, Hard Eight was not the film. He had a hard time making Hard Eight. That was not the film. The
studios kind of took it away from him.
Right. That was not the film that he wanted to make. And clearly he wanted to make the Boogie Nights film. But that scene just felt like, all right, well, let me throw Mamet. Just the timing of this, and like the spinning around of the dialogue and the interaction between the two players. And I think both of those people could have interacted well with and Mamet play, to be fair.
And that diner scene, the first scene of the film, is just screams, like something from like the bar scenes at Glengarry Glen Ross, right? When Philip Baker Hall sits down and talks to, let me buy you a cup of coffee. It's just, I mean, those like beats and that way it's delivered is the hesitation, the back and forth,
and to be fair, even the Philip Seymour Hoffman part in Hard Eight could be equated to the Alec Baldwin piece in Glengarry Glen Ross. Yeah. Right, where it's completely out of the blue, but it sets the line for Philip Baker Hall's lack of basically it shows you where his character's line actually is, and where he would like to be, but where he keeps coming back to so he can eke out a life for himself. And obviously you find out later about the guilt and all that kind of thing.
Well, I don't want to relitigate like the Deus Ex Machina aspect of that film. So.
Right, it's clear, right, and that's where it falls apart, right? Because Mamet would have never done that, right? It would have never been that level of, okay, we see this coming from a mile away. It is a proficient first film. It is very well acted.
Sure,
but that piece and how it ended is look, it was a great 60-minute movie. Yeah. And then the last 30 minutes kind of pulls the rug out from underneath you. You can get by because the acting is so good. And it's proficient enough to allow you to forgive a lot of its miscomings. But again, at the end of the day, that movie doesn't stick with you.
Yeah.
So I'm going to probably change mine. But my last one is, and again, it doesn't really tie to the master per se, but back to Paul Thomas Anderson and one of his favorite actors, and to what we're talking about now. But have you ever seen Oleana? Oleana, if you're not aware, is a David Mamet,
because it's another Mamet
stage play starring William H. Macy, and I forget the actress's name, and that probably plays into a lot of what the stage play is actually trying to talk to. But it is a stage play told in two parts. One is about a young female student of William H. Macy, who's a professor who's about to get tenure, and she's failing his course, and he's trying to help her out. And then cut through middle of the film, then it shifts, the power dynamic completely shifts, and she accuses him of sexual harassment, and he's trying to defend himself. So he's found himself on the other end of the power dynamic. Sorry, I already said the power dynamic. He's trying to find himself on the other end of trying to figure out exactly where all this is going, and it is an infuriating movie to watch. It is one of those movies, if you want to get into an argument with friends, watch Oleana. Okay. The poster, the tagline is like, whatever side you're on, you're wrong. So it's a great, it's a great like fuck you to the audience, but it is so much fun to watch it with someone new and to like see the shift and like how the characters completely, it's almost like Lynchian in a way where the characters are playing different roles halfway through the movie. It's kind of a Mulholland Drive almost switch to it. And again, clearly they're the same names. I mean, I'm stretching a little bit. Sure, there.
But I gotcha. I mean, I know the William H. Macy of it, and that's kind of, and I know like the scenario, and that's sort of about it. So I'm gonna have to.
It's not. I can see where it's frustrating, and it's not. It's probably not the one that you would go to. But it is.
Can I pair it with In the Company of Men and like?
I would pair it with The Shape of Things more than I would In the Company of Men. Okay. And another guy who's, I
didn't mean to shift to
no. A person whose initial career I was really enamored with, and then just nothing that he's done as of late has been interesting at all. He hit a wall of where it was. I think he had certain things to say, and then there was nothing else after that.
Yeah. Anything else you want to say about Oleana?
No.
Okay. Well, that was fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
So our go watch The Master.
Yeah, go watch The Master, and then watch the other things that we sort of put in conversation with it, because you might find those more interesting after watching The Master.
And let us know if we missed something, or if you disagree with us. Please, I'd like to know about it.
I'll give them your phone number. I'll make sure to add that in the notes as well, so that they can.
1-800-TAME is what they're. Oh my God.
Oh no. Okay. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next time.